What happens when one of the most beloved icons in entertainment sits down with a talk show host who thinks he can say whatever he wants? In just 31 seconds, a single comment would destroy years of professional reputation and expose the ugly truth behind the cameras. This is the story of how Cher walked into what she thought was a friendly interview and instead found herself face to face with a man who had already decided to tear her down. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday evening as Cher settled into the guest chair across from Maher. She had been doing interviews for decades, promoting everything from albums to movies to Broadway shows. This was supposed to be just another stop on her press tour, another chance to connect with fans and talk about her latest project. She smiled warmly at the audience, that famous Cher smile that had charmed millions around the world. But something felt different tonight. Maher sat behind his desk with a smirk that seemed a little too sharp, his eyes a little too cold. He shuffled through his note cards with the kind of deliberate slowness that made the air feel thick with anticipation. The audience could sense it too. There was an electric tension crackling through the studio, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "So, Cher," Bill began, leaning back in his chair with that trademark arrogant posture, "you've been in this business for what, 50 years now?" "Well, I started when I was 16, so yes, it's been a long journey," Cher replied graciously, her voice warm and genuine. She was used to questions about her longevity in the business. It was something she was proud of, having survived and thrived through decades of change in the entertainment industry. 50 years? Bill repeated, letting the number hang in the air like he was savoring it. That's a lot of reinvention, isn't it? A lot of different versions of yourself. There was something in his tone that made Cher's smile falter just slightly. She had excellent instincts about people, honed by decades in the spotlight. And right now, those instincts were telling her to be careful. "I think growth is important," she said diplomatically. "I've never wanted to stay in one place artistically. Whether it's music, acting, or anything else, I believe in pushing boundaries." "Pushing boundaries?" Bill nodded slowly, that smirk growing wider. "You certainly have done that. The costumes, the performances, the personal life. All very boundary pushing." The audience was starting to pick up on the undercurrent now. A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cher maintained her composure, but her posture had shifted slightly. She was sitting a little straighter, her hands clasped a little tighter. "I've always tried to be authentic," she said simply. "That's all anyone can do, really." "Authentic," Bill repeated, and now there was no mistaking the mockery in his voice. "That's interesting, coming from someone who's had so much work done." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. The audience gasped audibly. Camera operators exchanged glances. Even the production assistant standing off to the side looked shocked. This was not the kind of comment that usually got made on television, at least not so blatantly and cruelly. Cher's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, hurt, then something much sharper. Her decades of experience in dealing with difficult people kicked in, and she took a breath before responding. "I think that's a very personal comment, Bill," she said, her voice still controlled but with a steel edge creeping in. "And not really relevant to why I'm here tonight?" "Oh, but I think it is relevant," Bill pushed forward, clearly enjoying himself now. "You're here promoting this image of authenticity, of being true to yourself. But how authentic can someone be when they've essentially rebuilt themselves from the ground up?" The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Here was a woman who had given the world decades of joy, who had broken barriers and inspired countless people, and she was being attacked for personal choices that were nobody's business but her own. The audience was dead silent now. Not the good kind of silence that comes with rapt attention, but the horrified silence of people watching a car accident unfold. Cher's composure was remarkable. Lesser people would have walked off already, but she had faced down critics and bullies her entire career. She leaned forward slightly, fixing Bill with a stare that could have frozen water. "You know what's authentic, Bill?" she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Being comfortable with who you are, being happy with your choices, not tearing other people down to make yourself feel important." The words landed like a slap. Bill's smirk wavered for just a moment before he doubled down, clearly not expecting her to fight back with such precision. "I'm just asking the questions the audience wants answered," he said, gesturing broadly to the crowd. "We're all thinking it." "No, you're not," Cher shot back immediately. "You're being cruel because you think it's entertaining. There's a difference." The tension in the studio was now so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Production staff were starting to move around nervously, unsure whether to intervene. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming television history for all the wrong reasons. Bill leaned back, clearly trying to regain his composure and his sense of control over the situation. But something had shifted. The power dynamic he thought he had established was crumbling before his eyes. Cher was not going to be his victim tonight. "Look," he said, trying to sound reasonable while his eyes betrayed his growing frustration. "I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just saying that in an industry built on image, maybe we should be honest about what's real and what isn't." "And who made you the judge of what's real?" Cher asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Who gave you the right to sit there and decide what makes someone authentic or not?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Bill opened his mouth to respond, but Cher wasn't finished. "You want to talk about what's real?" she continued, her voice gaining power and momentum. "What's real is sitting here trying to have a conversation about my work, about things that matter, and instead getting attacked for personal choices that have nothing to do with you or anyone else." The audience was completely transfixed now. This wasn't just good television. This was a masterclass in dignity under fire. Cher was dismantling her attacker with surgical precision, using nothing but truth and moral clarity. Bill was starting to realize he had made a serious miscalculation. The woman sitting across from him was not going to crumble under his attack. If anything, she was getting stronger, more focused, more dangerous to his reputation with every word. "I think you're taking this too personally," he said weakly, trying to backtrack without admitting he was wrong. "How else should I take it?" Cher asked pointedly. "You invited me here as your guest, and then you decided to use your platform to humiliate me. If that's not personal, what is?" The words were delivered with such calm authority that they seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. This was not how these interviews usually went. Bill's jaw tightened visibly. He was a man used to being the smartest person in the room, the one with the cutting wit and the final word. But tonight, he was being outmaneuvered by someone who had decades more experience dealing with public scrutiny and personal attacks. His desperation was starting to show. "You know what I think?" he said, leaning forward with renewed aggression. "I think you're upset because someone finally had the courage to say what everyone else has been thinking but was too polite to mention." The audacity was staggering. Not only was he doubling down on his cruelty, but he was now positioning himself as some kind of truth-telling hero. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Several people were shaking their heads in visible disapproval. Cher's eyes flashed with something dangerous. She had been trying to keep this civil, to take the high road, but Bill seemed determined to drag this into the gutter. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter than before, but infinitely more powerful. "Courage?" she repeated, the single word dripping with contempt. "You think it takes courage to sit behind a desk and insult your guests? You think that makes you brave?" "I think it makes me honest," Bill shot back, his own voice rising now. "In a world full of fake people saying fake things, maybe we need someone willing to cut through the garbage." "And you've appointed yourself to that position?" Cher asked, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. "The great Bill Maher, separator of truth from fiction, judge of all that is real and authentic?" The mockery in her tone was devastating. She had turned his own arrogance back on him, exposing it for what it really was. But Bill was too deep in now to back down. Pride and ego were driving him forward, even as common sense screamed at him to stop. "Someone has to do it," he said, spreading his hands wide as if he were being reasonable. "Someone has to ask the hard questions." "Hard questions?" Cher laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think asking someone about their personal appearance is a hard question? You think that's journalism?" The audience was fully on her side now. There were murmurs of agreement, nods of approval. Even the camera operators were struggling to maintain their professional neutrality. This wasn't a debate, it was a dismantling. But Bill was spiraling now, his need to win overriding any sense of decency or professionalism. He reached for his next weapon, and it was the cruelest one yet. "Let's talk about your relationships then," he said with a nasty smile. "Since you want to discuss what's authentic, how many times have you been married now? 4? 5? Is that authentic love, or are you just collecting trophies?" The gasp from the audience was audible this time. People were genuinely shocked. This had crossed from uncomfortable to horrifying. Staff members were looking at each other with wide eyes, clearly wondering if they should intervene. But Cher didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to grow calmer, more centered. She had been through real pain, real heartbreak, real loss. She wasn't going to be broken by a petty man with a television show. "Now, you want to talk about my personal relationships?" she said, her voice steady and clear. "You want to reduce decades of my life, people I've loved and lost, to some kind of punchline for your show?" "I'm just pointing out patterns," Bill said, but his confidence was wavering now. He could see the disgust on the faces around him. "You talk about authenticity, but your track record suggests..." "My track record suggests what?" Cher interrupted, her voice cutting through his stammering like a blade. That I'm human? That I've made mistakes? That I've loved people and sometimes it didn't work out? She leaned forward now, her full attention focused on him like a laser. You want to know what's not authentic, Bill? Sitting in judgment of other people's lives, when you've never had the courage to put your heart on the line the way they have. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Bill's face flushed red. Everyone knew about his reputation, his cynicism about love and relationships, his pattern of keeping people at arm's length. She had turned the tables completely. That's not what this is about, he said weakly, but the fight had gone out of him. He was floundering now, looking around the studio as if searching for an escape route. Oh, but it is, Cher said, pressing her advantage. You want to sit there and tear apart my choices, my life, my relationships? But what about yours? When was the last time you took a real risk? When was the last time you opened your heart to someone? The silence was deafening. Bill opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He had been completely and utterly destroyed by his own guest, using nothing but truth and moral courage. You know what I think? Cher continued, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. I think you're scared. I think you're terrified of being vulnerable, of being human, of making the kinds of mistakes that real people make. So you hide behind this desk and this microphone, and you tear down people who have the courage to live authentic lives. The cameras captured every moment of Bill's humiliation. His smug confidence had evaporated completely. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing naked in public. The audience was silent, transfixed by what they were witnessing. That's enough, he said finally, but his voice cracked slightly on the words. I think we should move on to another topic. No, Cher said firmly. I don't think we should. I think we should finish this conversation. You wanted to talk about authenticity? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what it really means to be real. She stood up slightly in her chair, her presence filling the entire studio. Being authentic means owning your mistakes. It means admitting when you're wrong. It means treating other people with basic human decency, even when you disagree with them. Bill was squirming in his seat now, looking desperately at his production staff for help, but they were all frozen, unsure how to intervene in what had become a complete reversal of power. Being authentic, Cher continued relentlessly, means having the courage to apologize when you've hurt someone. It means recognizing that your platform comes with responsibility, not just the right to say whatever cruel thing pops into your head. The moral weight of her words was crushing. Every person in that studio could feel it. This wasn't just about Bill anymore. It was about basic human decency, about how we treat each other, about the difference between courage and cruelty. I invited you here as my guest, Bill said weakly, trying one last time to assert some authority. In my house, we discuss things openly. This isn't discussion, Cher said, cutting him off completely. This is ambush. This is you using your show as a weapon to attack people who can't fight back on equal terms. Except tonight, you picked the wrong person. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Bill's face had gone from red to pale, the color draining out of him as the full weight of his miscalculation became clear. He was trapped now, caught between his own ego and the growing realization that he had just destroyed himself on national television. But he wasn't finished yet. In a last desperate attempt to salvage something from this disaster, he reached for the most vicious weapon he had left. His voice, when he spoke, was dripping with contempt and barely controlled rage. You know what your problem is, Cher, he said, leaning forward with a sneer that made him look truly ugly. You think because you've been around forever, because people clap when you show up, that makes you untouchable. But the truth is, you're just another Hollywood has-been who can't accept that her time is over. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The entire studio seemed to recoil from the venom in his words. This wasn't just an insult. It was an attempt to destroy someone's entire legacy, their life's work, their very identity. Several audience members actually gasped out loud. Others shook their heads in disgust. But if Bill thought this would finally break Cher, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't even look hurt. Instead, something extraordinary happened. She smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a sarcastic smile, but a smile of absolute certainty, of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they were worth. Has been, she repeated softly, and there was something almost musical in the way she said it. Bill, let me tell you something about being a has-been. A has-been is someone who had something once and lost it, someone who peaked and then faded away. She stood up from her chair now, not in anger, but with the grace and dignity of true royalty. The cameras followed her movement, capturing every moment of what was about to become legendary television. But I never peaked, sweetheart, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I never faded. I've been reinventing myself for 50 years, while people like you have been sitting on the sidelines, throwing stones at people who actually had the courage to get in the ring." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a comeback. This was a masterpiece of human dignity, standing up to cruelty and small-mindedness. "You want to know what a has-been looks like?" Cher asked, her eyes never leaving Bill's face. A has-been is someone who gets their power from tearing other people down instead of building something themselves. A has-been is someone whose only claim to fame is saying mean things about people who are actually talented. Bill's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had no response, no comeback, no witty retort. He had been completely and utterly destroyed by his own guest, and everyone in the studio knew it. But Cher wasn't finished. She had one more devastating truth to deliver, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "You know what the saddest part is, Bill? I came here tonight excited to talk to you. I thought you were smart, funny, someone worth having a conversation with. But instead, I found a small, bitter man who gets his kicks from hurting people who can't hurt him back." The words landed like physical blows. Bill physically recoiled in his chair, his face now completely pale. Around the studio, production staff were staring in amazement. This was the most complete destruction of a host by a guest that anyone had ever witnessed. "And the really tragic part?" Cher continued, her voice softer now but no less powerful. "You could have been so much more than this. You have a platform, a voice, an audience. You could use it to lift people up, to have real conversations about things that matter. Instead, you chose to be a bully." She picked up her purse from beside her chair with the calm deliberation of someone who had made a decision. "I've been in this business for 50 years, and I've met every kind of person you can imagine. The talented and the talentless, the kind and the cruel, the brave and the cowardly. And you know what I've learned?" Bill couldn't speak. He was completely frozen, watching his career implode in real time. "I've learned that the people who try to make others feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest inside," Cher said with devastating clarity. "And I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because at the end of the day, when the cameras stop rolling and the audience goes home, you have to live with who you are. And tonight, you've shown everyone exactly who that island." She turned to the audience then, her voice warm and genuine, completely different from the steel it had been when addressing Bill. "Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience," she said graciously. "You deserve so much better than what you got tonight. You deserve hosts who respect their guests, who have real conversations, who treat people with basic human decency." The audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause, but thunderous, standing ovation applause. They were on their feet, clapping and cheering, some of them actually shouting words of support. It went on, echoing through the studio like a declaration of war against everything Bill represented. Cher smiled at them, that famous warm smile that had made her beloved around the world. She waved graciously, thanking them for their support. Then she turned back to Bill one final time. He was still sitting there, frozen in his chair, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse around him. His smugness was gone, his confidence shattered, his cruelty exposed for what it really was. He looked, in that moment, exactly like what Cher had called him, small. "Goodbye, Bill," she said simply. "I hope someday you figure out how to be better than this." And with that, she walked off the set, not storming off in anger, not running away in tears, but walking with the dignity and grace of someone who had just won the most important battle of her career. The audience continued to applaud as she made her exit, their cheers following her all the way to the door. Behind her, Bill sat in stunned silence, the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, to salvage the situation, but no words came. What could he possibly say after being so thoroughly exposed and defeated? The production staff scrambled to figure out what to do next. This wasn't how shows were supposed to end. Guests didn't usually destroy hosts so completely that they couldn't even speak. But that's exactly what had happened, and everyone knew it. In the hallway outside the studio, Cher paused for a moment to collect herself. The adrenaline was still pumping through her veins, but she felt something she hadn't expected: relief. She had stood up for herself, for basic human decency, for the idea that people deserved to be treated with respect, regardless of who they were or what choices they had made. Behind her, through the studio doors, she could still hear the audience applauding. They were applauding her, yes, but they were also applauding something bigger. They were applauding the idea that bullies don't always win, that cruelty doesn't always triumph, that sometimes just sometimes, dignity and truth can defeat meanness and small-mindedness. As she walked toward her dressing room, Cher knew that this moment would follow both of them for the rest of their careers. For her, it would be remembered as the night she stood up to a bully and won. For Bill, it would be remembered as the night he revealed who he really was and lost everything that mattered. The cameras in the studio finally stopped rolling, but the damage was done. In the span of one interview, Bill Maher had gone from controversial host to cautionary tale. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, when you try to destroy someone else, you end up destroying yourself instead. And Cher? She walked out of that studio with her head held high, knowing that she had fought the good fight and won, not through cruelty or meanness, but through dignity, truth, and the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. In a world that often rewards the loudest and the cruelest, she had proven that sometimes, just sometimes, grace and authenticity are the most powerful weapons of all.